Welcome to Quantum Voyager Stories, where science fiction touches the soul, and every story takes you somewhere you've never been, leaving something real behind. In a galaxy fractured by war and haunted by ancient laws, a forbidden love dares to bloom between two sworn enemies, a human soldier and a warrior from an alien race. From their union, a child is born. Not just any child, but one destined to reshape the future of both worlds. This is a story of survival, of sacrifice, and of a family forced to flee across the stars for the right to exist. It is a tale of love that defies boundaries, and a child whose mind outpaces anything humanity or alien kind has ever known. Welcome to The Forbidden Child, a sci-fi journey of heart, danger, and discovery. Kael had never truly left Velari. Though the war had ended 3 years ago, fragments of the planet still clung to his mind, like the violet haze of its skies, the floating valleys, and the twin moons that never seemed to sleep. He now lived aboard a decaying trade station along the border between Terran space and the neutral zone. A place so forgotten that most who stumbled into it chose to stay, simply because there was nowhere else to go. Kael had once been among the first Terran soldiers to set foot on Velari when the conflict began. Back then, he believed what the Academy had drilled into him, that the Velari were dangerous, deceptive, and incapable of peace. But on the surface of that luminous world, he had seen something no war report ever mentioned: bravery, sorrow, and moments of beauty that blurred the lines between alien and human. Now, seated at a dim-lit bar inside Noastra Station, Kael took a slow sip of bitter liquor. His gaze followed the news feed scrolling across a cracked display screen. Velari flashed into view. Civil unrest. Velari extremists on the rise. He clenched his glass, not out of anger, but from the strange pull in his chest. A pull he thought he'd silenced years ago. Officially, he was no longer a soldier. His records marked him as a technical neutral, consulting on inter-system logistics. But in truth, Kael was hiding from the Terran command, from the orders he could never justify, and from a single memory he refused to name. Then a voice spoke behind him. "You never did fit the neutral role, Kael." He turned. His heartbeat stalled. That voice, he knew it too well. And when his eyes met hers, silver, unmistakable, the eyes of Velari, he knew his fragile peace had just shattered. Selyra had found him, and the past had just walked back into his life. Kael hadn't heard her name in years, and yet now, standing in front of him in the dim haze of the station bar, she was unmistakable. Selyra. She hadn't changed, at least not in the ways that mattered. Her armor was different, sleeker, civilian now. But the way she held herself, shoulders square, gaze steady, like she could tear through a battle line with nothing but intent, that was still the same. And her eyes, those silver eyes that once stared down the barrel of his rifle, but chose not to pull the trigger. Kael rose slowly from his seat, every part of him on alert. Not out of fear, no, but because seeing her again stirred something in him he thought was buried. Something that still hadn't healed. "I thought you were dead," he said quietly. Her lips curved, not quite a smile. "I was." In every way that counted. The last time they'd seen each other, there had been blood on the snow-drenched cliffs of Velari. She had him cornered, weapon ready. He was wounded, half frozen, out of ammo. But instead of ending him, she had lowered her blade and walked away. No words, no explanation. Until now. Kael gestured to the empty seat across from him, and Selyra sat without hesitation. For a moment, neither spoke. The station's low hum filled the silence, wrapping them in something fragile and unreal. "Why now?" he finally asked. She didn't answer right away. Her gaze scanned the room like a soldier still reading every exit. When she looked back at him, something flickered across her face. Uncertainty, maybe, or regret. "Because something is coming," she said, "and I couldn't face it alone." Kael leaned back, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Whatever had brought her here, it wasn't coincidence. And deep down, he already knew this wasn't just about the past. It was about what they had started, and what was still to come. They didn't talk much after that. There was no need for it. Kael led Selyra through the winding metal corridors of Neo-Astra Station, past flickering lights and sealed bulkheads that hadn't been touched in years. The station was quiet now, late cycle, with only the hum of recycled air and the occasional shuffle of tired boots echoing off the walls. He took her to a maintenance wing no one really used anymore. A place half forgotten, tucked between shielded conduits and decommissioned loading bays. This had been his corner of nowhere, his safe zone, and now it was hers too. The door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside was small but clean. A cot, a bench, a table with 2 mugs still stained from last cycle's coffee. There were tools scattered across a shelf, and a half-disassembled comms unit lying open like an autopsy in progress. Selyra stepped in, scanning everything without a word. "You still fix things," she said finally, setting her bag down. Kael gave a dry chuckle. Machines don't lie. They either work, or they don't. There was a pause. Not awkward, just full. Like both of them knew there were things bubbling beneath the surface they weren't ready to touch yet. He watched as she removed her outer jacket, revealing the dark combat weave underneath. Her figure was as sharply drawn as he remembered, elegant, dangerous, real. The scars on her arms told stories he didn't dare ask about. She turned to face him. "You kept this quiet," she said. "The station. Your existence." Kael nodded. "No records. No visitors. That was the plan. And now?" His voice softened. "Now? I don't know." She stepped closer, close enough for him to smell the faint metallic scent of her armor, and something else, earthy, like wildflowers from Velari's mountain valleys. "I didn't come here just to say hello," she said. Her voice was low, almost unsteady. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I've been carrying alone." Kael didn't ask what. He simply nodded and gestured for her to sit. Whatever it was, it could wait another breath. But in that breath, as they sat down across from each other, something unsaid passed between them. Something neither time nor war had been able to burn away. The fire hadn't gone out. It had just gone quiet. Until now. Kael didn't need her to say it. He saw it in her eyes the moment she placed his hand gently against her side. Warmth. Movement. Life. At first, he froze, unsure if it was real or just a terrible trick his mind was playing. But Selyra nodded, her expression unreadable. He felt it again, subtle, fluttering beneath the surface of her skin. His heart sank like a starship losing power in vacuum. "How long?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. 17 cycles, she said. Close to 5 Terran months. Kael backed away instinctively, running a hand through his hair. He turned his back to her, staring blankly at the tools on his workbench like they might offer an answer. "They didn't. You should have told me," he muttered. "I shouldn't have come at all," Selyra said softly. The room fell silent. It wasn't anger that flooded Kael. It was fear, not for himself, but for her. For them. This wasn't just a complication. It was a death sentence. "You know what they'll do if they find out," he said, turning toward her again. "Velari law, Terran law, they both forbid it. A hybrid child like this is a threat," she finished, voice tight. "To the purity of the bloodlines. To peace. To everything they think they've secured." Kael's jaw clenched. To hell with peace if it means pretending this child shouldn't exist. Her eyes shimmered, not from tears but from something deeper. Hope, maybe, or desperation clinging to what little they had left. "I didn't come for pity," she said, "or protection. I came because I knew you wouldn't run." Kael stepped forward. Gently, he placed both hands on her shoulders. "I'm not running," he said. "Not from this. Not from you." He didn't know how they would survive. But in that moment, with his palms resting on the quiet miracle growing inside her, he knew one thing with absolute clarity. He would burn the whole galaxy down before letting anyone take this child from him. They didn't have time to wait for courage. The next cycle passed in a blur. Kael rerouting security nodes, wiping station logs, disabling internal comms. Every motion was sharp, practiced, fueled by a quiet desperation that left no room for hesitation. Selyra helped where she could, her movements slower now, but precise. Neither of them spoke much. The decision had been made the moment Kael said, "I'm not running." Now, they were running. Kael's stolen access codes still worked. Remnants of old favors owed and debts never paid. In a maintenance hangar buried beneath the lower decks, a decommissioned cargo skiff waited under dust and shadows. Barely flight-worthy, but Kael had flown worse in wartime. Selyra watched him power it up, her hand resting protectively on her abdomen. There was something haunting in the way her eyes followed the flickering console lights, as if she was memorizing the shape of every system, every risk. "Where are we going?" she asked. Kael didn't look away from the console. "Off-grid. There's a planet, Met Horus. No surveillance, no patrol routes. It was abandoned after the Velari conflict. You think we'll be safe? I think no one else is stupid enough to go there." "That's good enough." The ship's engines sputtered to life, coughing like an old man waking from a long sleep. The lights on the panel blinked amber. Still unstable, but functional. It would do. They boarded in silence. The docking clamps hissed open with a sound Kael always associated with war, finality, detachment, escape. His fingers danced over the navboard. The station systems were still blind from the loop he'd injected into security. "We'll have about 15 minutes before they notice we're gone," he said. Selyra sat beside him, strapping in with a wince. "That's generous." As the skiff shuddered free from the hangar and slipped into open space, Kael let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Behind them, Neo-Astra shrank into the blackness. In front of them, Met Horus loomed like a ghost in the star map, silent, desolate, perfect. There would be no turning back. Not from the child. Not from her. Kael tightened his grip on the controls. Whatever waited for them on Met Horus, he'd face it all. Because somewhere in the void between stars, they had just become a family. The sky above Met Horus was the color of rusted iron, heavy with static and strange silence. The kind of silence that made Kael's skin crawl. He adjusted the controls of the skiff as they descended, the battered thrusters whining against the thin atmosphere. Below, jagged ridgelines carved the terrain like scars. Half-collapsed structures, old Terran bunkers, Velari shrines long since looted, rose like bones from the dust. No signs of life. No signals. Just ash, rock, and memories. Selyra sat beside him, her face pale beneath the ambient light. She hadn't said much since they left Neo-Astra. The weight of their choice hung between them, unspoken but inescapable. As the skiff settled onto the cracked landing platform, Kael powered down the engines and reached for his sidearm. It was habit. No one had been to Met Horus in years, but that didn't mean nothing lingered. Selyra's voice broke the quiet. "Smells like burnt copper." Kael gave a dry nod. "That's the soil." Bombardment turned most of it to glass during the third Velari offensive. They stepped outside into the heat shimmer of late sun. Met Horus had 2 suns, both weak now. Fading stars with just enough warmth to keep the world from freezing. The air tasted of metal and grit. Kael led them across the plateau to the remains of an old relay station, its antenna bent and split, half swallowed by sand. Inside, the shelter was intact enough. Reinforced walls, a still-working filtration unit, a power core Kael could coax back to life. He set about rigging the basics: heat, light, water. Selyra unpacked the last of their supplies in silence. They didn't say it, but they both knew this would be their hiding place. Maybe for days, maybe longer. That night, Kael stood just beyond the threshold, eyes scanning the horizon. Met Horus was deathly quiet, but it was also still, isolated, forgotten. "Perfect," he whispered. Behind him, Selyra lay curled on the cot, her hands protectively resting over the soft curve of her belly. He hadn't asked how far along she really was. He didn't need to. Her body was already changing. And soon, their child, Nyra, would arrive. Kael exhaled slowly, the dry wind brushing past him like a ghost. There were no patrols here. No satellites. No Terran command. No Velari extremists. Just them. Just this battered world. And for the first time in too long, the faintest echo of peace. The contractions started just before dawn. Kael had been outside, tightening the seal on the eastern access hatch, when he heard her cry out from inside the shelter. It wasn't loud. Selyra was never one to show weakness, but it carried a sharpness that made his blood run cold. He rushed in. She was on the floor, bracing herself against the edge of the cot, sweat already beading on her brow. "It's happening," she said through gritted teeth. Kael nodded once, then moved. No panic, no hesitation, just instinct. He had no medical training, but war had taught him how to stop bleeding, reset bones, and keep people alive in impossible circumstances. Birth was different, but it was still survival. He could handle that. The shelter wasn't built for this. The lighting flickered, casting everything in a dim, amber hue. The air smelled of metal, recycled too many times. Outside, winds howled low and steady, a constant reminder that they were utterly alone. Kael boiled water, laid down every clean scrap of cloth they had, and tried to make the space as sterile as possible. Selyra barely spoke, her breath short, controlled, her eyes locked onto his. "I'm here," he said, kneeling beside her. "I've got you." She nodded, a silent warrior's trust. The labor dragged for hours. Time dissolved into a haze of pain, commands, and moments that stretched impossibly long. Selyra endured it all with the same ferocity she brought to battle. Her hands clutched his as if anchoring herself to the world, refusing to give in. And then, at last, a new cry echoed through the shelter. Not sharp, not loud. Soft, steady, otherworldly. Kael stared, breathless, as he lifted the child into his arms. She was small, warm, her skin a soft blend of Terran and Velari tones. Earthy bronze with a faint, silvery shimmer beneath. Her eyes opened far too early, impossibly aware, and glowing. Faintly, a quiet violet light pulsed from them, as if she were reading the world already. Selyra collapsed back, exhausted but smiling, tears streaking the dust on her cheeks. Kael placed the child against her chest. For a moment, the wind outside fell silent. The world, even in its brokenness, paused for this one breath of life. "What do we call her?" he asked quietly. Selyra looked down at the tiny face nestled against her. "Nyra," she whispered. "It means light born in shadow in Old Velari." Kael touched Nyra's forehead, stunned by how small and vast she felt at once. Born in ruin, cradled in exile, and already, more than either of them understood, Nyra was unlike any child Kael had ever seen. She didn't cry much. She didn't flail or fuss like other newborns he'd known during evacuation missions, when terrified families huddled in refugee stations. Nyra barely made a sound unless she was cold or hungry, and even then, her tiny cries felt more like pulses than wails. As if her voice didn't need to be loud, just felt. Her eyes were the first thing people would notice, if there had been anyone else to see. A soft violet glow shimmered beneath her irises, pulsing gently, like light through a thin crystal. They weren't blinding or unnatural, but they drew you in. When Kael looked into them, he often forgot to breathe. It felt like staring into something older than himself. She had Selyra's delicate features, high cheekbones, smooth skin with a warm bronze hue, and Kael's strong jaw, softened by her round cheeks. But her presence, even as an infant, was something else entirely. She radiated calm, control, and something unnameable. Kael kept telling himself not to read into it. She was just a baby, a child, his daughter. But late at night, when she turned her gaze toward the walls as if following currents no one else could see, he wasn't so sure. Selyra, though still recovering, moved with the grace of someone who had fought through pain and won. She watched Nyra constantly, not with fear, but reverence. She would hum ancient Velari lullabies, ones Kael didn't understand, and the baby would still. Quiet, as if the tones spoke to something deeper. "She listens differently," Selyra said one morning as she fed Nyra under the pale light of Methris's twin sons. "Not just with ears, with understanding." Kael didn't answer. He was too busy watching his daughter stare at a broken transmitter across the room. The device had been dead since they arrived, its panel cracked, power core removed. Yet as Nyra looked at it, the console blinked. Once, then again. Kael crossed the room and pulled the panel open. Still dead. No surge. No signal. But the light had been real. He'd seen it. And Nyra had smiled. A reflex, he told himself. A coincidence. But deep inside, a quiet truth settled into his bones. Nyra wasn't just different because of her heritage. She was becoming something neither Terran nor Velari had ever witnessed. And they were alone on a dying planet, raising the one being who might change everything. Kael looked down at his daughter, who now stared at him with those impossibly steady eyes. He whispered, not for her, but for himself. You're not just born from the shadows, little one. You are the light that survived them. It started with patterns. Kael first noticed it when he caught Nyra staring at the exposed wiring of the solar array. Not just in that idle, baby-curious way. She tracked the flow of light, blinked in rhythm with the charged pulses, her tiny brow furrowing as if solving a puzzle only she could see. She was barely 2 weeks old. At first, he thought it was his imagination. He was tired, running on next to no sleep, and seeing things he wanted to see. But then the water purifier shut down. It had been sputtering for days. Old, corroded, salvaged from Velari wreckage. Kael had been meaning to tear it apart and start over. But when he walked in that morning, Nyra was lying in her crib nearby, her hand reaching out just a few inches from the unit. The system was humming. Green lights. Fully functional. He stared, heart caught in his throat. There was no way. He hadn't touched it. Later that same day, he left a broken comms relay on the table. Nyra was napping nearby in her sling, strapped against Selyra's chest. When Selyra leaned over to adjust the cloth, the baby reached out. Just once, a soft touch of her finger across the dusty metal surface. The relay pinged. Kael nearly dropped his tool. That night, under the faint hum of the generator and the dim stars outside Methras's thin atmosphere, he sat across from Selyra, tension thick in the air. She's not just quick, he said. It's more than memory. It's like she understands systems. Power flow. Function. Like she feels them. Selyra didn't argue. She cradled Nyra, gently brushing a thumb across her forehead. The child's eyes fluttered open, glowing faintly again, that soft violet shimmer pulsing to the rhythm of something unseen. She's listening to everything, Selyra said, and the world is answering. Kael ran a hand down his face. I don't know how to protect her from that. You don't, Selyra replied. You just teach her how to hold it. But how do you teach something no one's ever been? In the days that followed, the signs became harder to ignore. Nyra began to respond to voice patterns, echoing tones with uncanny precision. She tracked Kael's fingers across control panels as if mapping every sequence. Once, he whispered her name from across the shelter, and she turned her head before he spoke it out loud. Kael no longer doubted what he was seeing. His daughter wasn't just learning. She was adapting, absorbing, communicating with a world that hadn't been taught how to listen back. He stared at her one evening, bathed in the pale red glow of sunset over the Met Horus dunes. She wasn't just extraordinary. She was impossible. And somehow, terrifyingly, she was only getting started. The days on Met Horus were long, dust-colored stretches of quiet heat and still air. The twin suns moved slowly overhead, casting pale orange light through the cracks in the shelter's reinforced walls. Outside, nothing stirred. The planet slept, forgotten by the rest of the galaxy. Inside, Kael found something he hadn't felt in years. A rhythm. He woke with the soft sounds of Nyra breathing beside him. He boiled water, rationed supplies, fixed whatever needed fixing. He and Selyra moved in sync, without orders, without structure, just life. Quiet and hard, but real. And Nyra thrived. Each day brought something new. She smiled now, small, thoughtful smiles that made Kael's chest ache in the best way. She followed movement, responded to touch, recognized voices. And every time Kael held her, something in him softened, cracked open. He was still haunted by what he'd done, by what they were running from. But here in this stillness, he could breathe. So could she. And so could Selyra. One afternoon, Kael stood at the edge of the rocky plateau behind their shelter, watching the horizon melt into the red haze of Methras's twilight. The silence was deep. Not empty, but full. Like the calm before a storm, or the breath before promise. Selyra came up beside him, Nyra bundled in her arms. "She's changing fast," she said. Kael nodded. "She's not the only one." They stood together in the fading light, the wind brushing past like an old friend. No alarms, no gunships, no directives, no war, just this moment, and the sound of a child cooing in her mother's arms. "I used to think I couldn't live anywhere without looking over my shoulder," Kael said, "always waiting for someone to drag me back into the fight. And now?" Selyra asked. Kael looked at the shelter behind them. Simple, weather-worn, but filled with quiet laughter, shared meals, and the strange, boundless curiosity of their daughter. Now, when he checked the perimeter, it wasn't out of paranoia, it was protection. Now, when he worked on the generator, it wasn't for survival, it was for comfort. For them. He took a slow breath, then spoke the words before he could second-guess them. "Now I think this is home." Selyra said nothing, but she leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. Nyra nestled between them. It wasn't permanent. Deep down, they both knew that. But it was real, and for a little while it was enough. The war was far away, the future unknown. But here, in the ruins of a dead world, love had taken root. And Kael, soldier, fugitive, father, had finally found something worth staying for. It started with a flicker. Nothing more. Kael was doing a systems check on the old solar regulator. Nyra had been hovering near the panel again, fascinated by its pulsing lights, when one of the wall-mounted indicators blinked twice, then stayed lit. Amber, not red. No alarm. Just strange. He frowned, checked the diagnostics, and found no faults. But something felt wrong. An unease pressed against the edges of his instincts, the kind that never showed up on readouts. The kind that whispered, "Look deeper." That night, while Selyra slept with Nyra curled at her side, Kael disassembled the central transmitter array. They hadn't used the comms system since landing. It had been stripped for parts, power cell removed, emitter cable disconnected. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that something had awakened. Buried deep inside the relay was a small Velari crystal interface, wedged behind the auxiliary board. Selyra must have stashed it there months ago, likely a backup memory node from her old field kit. It was dormant. Or at least, it should have been. Kael held it up to the dim lamplight. It hummed faintly in his palm. Not powered, not active, but resonating. His heart sank. Velari crystals weren't just data storage. They were semi-sentient memory tools, designed to adapt to emotional resonance. They could pair with nearby systems. Occasionally, they could ping back if touched by something strong enough. Something conscious. Someone like Nyra. Kael's breath caught. It made sense now. The flickering lights. The subtle glitches. Nyra's increasing curiosity with the devices around her. She hadn't meant to do it. She probably didn't even know how she'd done it. But if the crystal had activated, even briefly, it might have sent out a signal. And if anyone had been listening, he slid the panel shut and sat down heavily on the floor, the crystal still glowing in his palm. Medharis was supposed to be a graveyard. Dead tech, dead air, nothing of value. But one short pulse from a Velari crystal tied to an unregistered frequency that was like a flare in deep space. A whisper in the dark, and someone would hear it. The next morning, Kael didn't tell Selyra right away. He watched her feeding Nyra, humming softly, her smile tired but peaceful. For the first time since the war, she looked like a mother. Not a fugitive, not a warrior, just a woman holding her child. He wanted to preserve that moment for just a little longer. But far above Medharis, in the cold silence of space, algorithms had already flagged the anomaly. Unregistered Velari signal. Origin, restricted zone. Ping acknowledged. Someone, somewhere, had noticed. The signal didn't go unnoticed. Within 37 minutes of its detection, the encrypted pulse from Medharis reached the black chamber at the heart of Terran command, buried deep beneath the polar crust of Earth. The chamber wasn't marked on any map. It had no official designation. Only those clear at the highest echelon knew its real name. Directive Echo Black. A table of cold steel sat in the center, surrounded by men and women who had long since traded humanity for policy. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. The data was all there, projected in ghostly blue above the table. A flare of unknown origin, Velari text signature, unregistered zone. Pinged and gone. Silent again. But enough. Probability of hybrid presence. 82.4%, the AI briefed. That was more than enough. The room fell still, the kind of stillness that came before decisions no one wanted to write down. A hybrid child, Velari and human, wasn't just a violation of the Accord. It was a threat to everything the Terran political structure had built since the war. The old fears were still fresh. What happens when two enemy species create something new? Something unpredictable? Something that could surpass both? Terran Command had asked that question once a decade ago. The answer had been silence. Silence and secret protocols. Now, with the ping confirmed and location traced to Met Horus, the answer was no longer theoretical. A voice broke the silence, dry, measured, surgical. Enact Cleansing Protocol 7. No discussion. No hesitation. It was policy, after all. A mission package was dispatched before the hour ended. No flux. No emblems. Just a clean, deniable task force. Half composed of elite Terran soldiers, half borrowed mercenaries with flexible loyalties. Quiet, fast, and brutal. Their orders were simple. Confirm presence of hybrid subject. Eliminate target. No witnesses. Back on Met Horus, Kael didn't yet know the full weight of what was coming. But he felt it. A subtle shift in the air, a sharpness in his gut that years of combat had trained him to trust. He stood outside the shelter that evening, eyes fixed on the sky. The stars had always been constant, distant, silent. Tonight, they felt like they were watching. Inside, Selyra noticed his quiet tension. "You've been out here a while," she said, stepping beside him. Kael didn't respond right away. He couldn't shake the image of the crystal pulsing in his hand. Couldn't stop imagining how fast the galaxy could move when it wanted to erase something. "I think our time here is running out," he finally said. She didn't ask why. She just looked up at the sky with him. Two warriors, one child, and a storm they could both sense on the horizon. Above them, somewhere far beyond the dust of Met Horus, engines had already ignited. They were coming. They weren't called soldiers. Not officially. The transmission labeled them as Recovery Unit 9, but those in the field had another name for them, Ghost Trackers. They didn't serve under any single flag. Instead, they operated in the liminal space between Terran Command, covert contracts, and post-war resentment that still bled across stars. Unacknowledged, untraceable, highly effective. This unit, unlike most, wasn't fully human. Half the team wore Terran armor, matte gray, unmarked, scarred from campaigns on forgotten moons. The other half bore sleek obsidian plating etched with glowing blue glyphs. Velari tech, custom forged for speed and lethality. These weren't official representatives of the Velari people. They were extremists, fanatics who saw interbreeding as heresy against the purity of their species. An uneasy alliance, forged not through trust, but hatred. Hatred of the same thing. The child. Captain Rowe, the mission lead, reviewed the dossier inside the dropship as it cut through the atmosphere of Met Horus. The file was thin. Just a location, a timestamp, and one damning line. Confirmed hybrid signal. Terminate and recover. He had no interest in politics. He was a man of math, of calculated silence, of finishing missions and collecting payment. But even he paused when the image of the potential target flashed briefly across the screen. Projected, theorized, extrapolated from biodata. A child, perhaps a few months old, born of Terran and Velari genetic stock. Unregistered, unauthorized, unnatural. Beside him, a Velari extremist named Shul shifted in her seat, her long fingers tightening around the handle of her weapon. Her eyes, brilliant silver like Selyra's, held no warmth. "They should have never allowed her to live," she muttered. Ro didn't argue. He rarely did. He simply nodded toward the viewport as Met Horus rose into view. Red, barren, forgotten. "We finished the job," he said. No delays. No witnesses. The dropship touched down miles from Kael's shelter, cloaked by terrain and dampened emissions. From above, it was just another shadow in the dust. They moved in silence, spreading across the rocks like phantoms. Their scans detected faint heat signatures. Shelter systems. Life. One adult human. One Velari female. One smaller presence. Distinct, stable, unusual. Bingo. As the sun dipped low behind Methorus's jagged hills, the squad began their approach. No announcements. No warnings. Their boots left no trails, their weapons set to stun or vaporize, depending on resistance. Back at the shelter, Kael's instincts flared again, louder this time. He turned suddenly from the workbench, eyes narrowing. "What is it?" Selyra asked, sensing the shift. He moved to the wall, hand reaching for the weapon he hadn't touched in weeks. "Something's wrong," he said. "We're not alone." Outside, less than 2 kilometers away, 12 operatives moved like wolves in the dust. And they weren't coming to talk. The first shot didn't come from the sky. It came from the rocks behind the ridge, silent, sharp, and far too precise to be anything but professional. A scorched line of plasma sizzled past the shelter's eastern wall, cutting deep into the rock, a warning more than a miss. Kael didn't hesitate. "Go," he barked, already pulling Selyra toward the rear hatch. She clutched Nyra tightly against her chest, the baby startled but silent, as if sensing the shift in the air. The second shot hit the power line. Sparks rained down across the floor, and the lights flickered violently before dying out completely. The shelter dropped into shadow, the only illumination now the glow of Nyra's eyes and the warning pulses of Kael's emergency beacon. He tossed Selyra a pulse pistol, lightweight, modified, old but reliable. She caught it without breaking stride. "They're trained," she said. "They're close." Kael nodded grimly. "Closer than I thought." Outside, the wind carried no sound, no footfalls, no voices. Just the low, unnatural hum of tactical cloaks and calibrated aggression. The enemy wasn't here to scout. They were here to finish something. The back tunnel was narrow, cut through ancient stone during the war. It had once been an escape route for Velari soldiers, and Kael had kept it clear, just in case. That case was now. He led the way, his rifle up, sweeping corners with practiced efficiency. Selyra followed, Nyra strapped tight to her chest, her movements steady despite the terrain. They didn't speak. There was no time. A sharp whine split the silence. One of the enemy's drones, small, fast, built for tight environments, shot through the corridor behind them. Kael dropped to a knee, aimed, and fired. The impact sent it spinning, sparking, dead before it could transmit a lock. But it was too late. "They know," Selyra said. Kael tapped his earpiece. No signal. Jammed. They emerged into a rocky outcropping behind the ridge. Medharis stretched around them in bleak, open silence. Nowhere to run. Nowhere to hide. The old cargo skiff sat buried in the cliffside, covered with camo netting. Kael ripped it free and opened the side hatch. "Get in. If I can get the engine online, we can make a run for the ridge belt. They won't risk chasing us through a blind." Selyra climbed in, shielding Nyra. Kael turned back, covering the entrance. A shadow moved in the distance. Then another. Shapes, silent, dark, coordinated, closed in from both sides. Kael steadied his rifle. "They're here," he said, and the first shot of the real fight rang out. The first blast hit the cliffside above them, spraying molten rock and dust across the hull of the skiff. Kael ducked low, shielding his eyes as debris rained down. His ears rang. The next shot landed even closer, this time from something heavier. A combat mech. It strode into view like a demon from old war footage, its silhouette massive against the blood-red sky of Medharis. Velari built, Terran modified. Heavy armor. Plasma cannons on both arms. And worse, an autonomous combat AI guiding it from within. Kael froze. They hadn't sent just soldiers. They'd sent annihilation. Inside the skiff, Selyra clutched Nyra tighter as the walls shook around them. The baby whimpered, her small fingers clutching instinctively at her mother's chest. "Kael!" Selyra shouted, voice sharp. "We can't outrun that thing." Kael knew it. They wouldn't even get off the ground before the mech lit them up. He had seconds, maybe less, before the next salvo turned their shelter into slag. And that's when it happened. Nyra screamed. Not a normal cry. Not a baby's wail of fear or pain. It was something deeper, wider. A sound that didn't just cut through the air, it shivered through the stone. Kael felt it in his chest, like a pressure drop. The mech stuttered mid-step. Its lights flickered. Its right arm, fully charged and aiming, twitched, then froze. Nyra's eyes were open now, glowing. Not the soft violet shimmer they had seen before, but radiant, brilliant, almost blinding. And the mech, it moved without command. Its legs locked. One of its arms began to shake violently, gears grinding against gears, metal shrieking as if resisting something that wasn't mechanical. The hull warped. Kael stumbled back as the combat mech twisted. Literally twisted, like something massive and invisible was crushing its inner core. The armor folded inward, metal creaking and groaning until one of its limbs snapped off entirely and slammed into the ground with a deafening crash. "No way," Kael muttered. "That's not possible." The mech's AI tried to reboot. Lights blinked in chaotic patterns. Its cannon fired once, harmlessly into the sky. Then it shut down. Its massive frame collapsed to its knees, smoke hissing from its vents. Dead. Kael turned toward the skiff. Selyra was frozen, holding Nyra, who had gone still again. Her eyes dimmed slowly, the glow fading back to that quiet shimmer. The child blinked, once, and yawned. Kael didn't speak. He couldn't. No weapon. No system. No training could explain what he'd just seen. Selyra looked at him, her voice calm, but trembling. She didn't even know what she was doing. Kael nodded slowly. "And that's what scares me." Somewhere in the dust and silence of Medharis, the war had changed. And the galaxy had just felt the first ripple of a child who could bend machines with her mind, without meaning to. The desert wind howled behind them, sweeping over the broken wreckage of the destroyed combat mech and washing their footprints away within minutes. Kael led the way, Nyra wrapped tightly in his arms now, her breathing soft against his chest. Selyra followed close behind, her pulse pistol clutched tight, eyes scanning every ridge. They didn't speak. The silence between them was heavy, not with fear, but with knowing. The strike team wouldn't be the last. Whatever forces were hunting them now understood exactly what Nyra was capable of, and they wouldn't stop until the child was either captured or gone. Kael's mind raced. There was nowhere left to hide, except one place. He turned them north, deeper into the spine of Medharis, past the abandoned bunkers and the half-buried shelters, up toward the jagged rise of the Obsidian Range, jagged peaks that clawed into the sky like broken fingers. It was where the Velari had once tested their most dangerous technologies during the war. Kael remembered reading about it in sealed briefings. Forbidden research, collapsed tunnels, non-recoverable personnel. It had been marked dead, off-limits, untouchable, perfect. They reached the outer edge of the range by dusk. The terrain shifted from dry sand to dark stone, black, glassy, almost metallic underfoot. The cliffs shimmered with a faint green sheen, even in the fading light. Selyra glanced up. "This place remembers," she whispered. Kael didn't ask what she meant. He could feel it too. The way the wind moved differently here. How sounds seemed to fold inward. The air buzzed faintly around them, like low-frequency static that only Nyra seemed unbothered by. She slept calmly, nestled in his arms. He found the entrance by accident, a cracked section of the cliffside that, under the right angle, shimmered unnaturally. Cloaking tech. Ancient. Failing. He pressed his hand to the rock. It flickered, then yielded. A doorway opened into darkness. They stepped inside. The temperature dropped immediately. The walls pulsed faintly with embedded Velari energy lines, old but still humming. As they moved deeper into the cavernous interior, Kael's boots echoed on the alloyed floor. Machinery lay scattered along the halls, forgotten constructs with curved plating and strange, glass-like tubing. Some had fused into the walls. Others remained intact, but dormant, as if waiting for a signal that hadn't come in decades. "This was a nerve center," Selyra said, her voice low with awe. They built prototypes here. Things even the Velari Council condemned. Kael looked around. Why leave it intact? Because even the Council was afraid to touch it. They settled into a central chamber, round, with a high ceiling and dormant systems embedded into the walls like ribs in a mechanical beast. A cracked console pulsed weakly in one corner. Kael adjusted his rifle and began setting perimeter traps, just in case. Selyra laid Nyra down in a small alcove, her hand gently stroking the child's hair. This place wasn't meant to be a home, she said. No, Kael be plaive. But it's the only place they won't look. And beneath the stone, something ancient had just stirred. It began with a hum, so faint, Kael thought it was his own ears ringing from exhaustion. But Nyra's eyes snapped open the moment the sound passed through the chamber, like it had spoken directly to her and no one else. She sat upright, unaided. Her gaze drifted toward the curved wall embedded with dormant Velari circuitry, where pulses of faded light flickered like a dying heartbeat. Selyra, Kael whispered. Do you hear that? Selyra didn't respond at first. She was watching Nyra, who now stood on unsteady feet, one hand stretched out toward the glowing console, the other clenched in a small, focused fist. The girl's eyes weren't just shimmering now, they were reacting. The violet glow in them pulsed in sync with the light on the wall, as if her heartbeat and the circuitry had found a rhythm only they shared. She's listening, Selyra murmured. To what? To them. Kael didn't like the sound of that. Nyra stepped closer to the console. It came alive at her touch. Not explosively, not dangerously. Gently, as though it recognized her. Symbols, ancient Velari glyphs, scrolled across the screen in slow, methodical waves. Kael stared. That system's dead. It hasn't been powered in decades. Not dead, Selyra said quietly. Just waiting for the right voice. And Nyra was speaking. Not aloud. Not in words they could hear. But the atmosphere had changed. The air itself was vibrating with something intentional. Kael could feel it in his chest like pressure, like the way deep space went silent before a warp drive burst to life. The lights grew brighter. Conduits along the walls pulsed awake. Shapes shifted. Parts of a room rearranged themselves, folding open like petals of a machine flower. The console reoriented, projecting a soft light upward. And from that light came sound. Not mechanical, not digital. A voice. Dozens of voices. Layered. Harmonized. Genderless. Ageless. It spoke in Velari first, then in something else. Then, as if sifting through languages with supernatural ease, it settled into a smooth, Terran accented tone. We see her. Kael stepped forward, weapon raised. Who's we? Nyra turned to him, calm. They're not here to hurt us. She can understand them, Selyra said, stunned. No, Nyra said quietly. They understand me. The voice continued. This mind is new, not bound by code, not born of blood. It is both. It is neither. It is connection. Kael lowered his weapon slowly. Sweat beaded at his temple. What is this place? A node, Selyra said. A Velari deep interface chamber. They used them to teach prototype AIs to think. Nyra walked closer to the light, unafraid. The voice responded to her presence, adapting tone and rhythm, as if the system were no longer running pre-programmed responses, but conversing. She's not just hearing it, Kael said. She's communing, and the AI was listening. She is not anomaly, it said. She is inheritance. Kael looked at his daughter, barely a year old, still so small in his arms, yet standing at the heart of a forbidden machine like it had been built around her. Selyra stepped beside him, her voice low. She was never meant to be hidden. Places like this were waiting for her long before we knew she existed. The chamber pulsed again. Calm. Inviting. Something had awakened in this mountain. But more than that, someone was answering back. Kael sat alone on the edge of the platform, just outside the main chamber, his rifle resting beside him, untouched. The glow of the Velari circuitry behind him pulsed gently through the ancient walls, soft, steady, rhythmic. Like a heartbeat. Like breath. Like it was alive. Inside, Nyra slept soundly in the circular cradle that had risen from the floor. an artifact of alien engineering now repurposed into a crib for a child the galaxy was never supposed to meet. Her tiny form lay perfectly still, eyes closed, fingers curled around a glowing thread of energy that pulsed like a toy made of light. And Kael couldn't stop staring at her. He'd faced fear before. Fear of death. Fear of capture. Fear of watching people die because he'd been too slow to act. But this was different. This fear wasn't about losing her. It was about what she might become. The way she moved around the machines. The way they moved around her. How the chamber responded to her thoughts before she voiced them. It wasn't natural. It wasn't even alien. It was beyond. He looked down at his hands. Calloused, rough, scarred from years of combat. He was a man of instincts, of control, of cause and effect. But how could he protect his daughter from something he couldn't shoot, couldn't outrun, couldn't understand? She's still Nyra, Selyra said quietly, stepping out from the corridor. Kael didn't look at her. Is she? Selyra sat beside him, her posture calm, her face unreadable in the blue glow. You're afraid. She glowed, Selyra. She stopped a mech with her mind. She speaks to machines that don't speak any language. She touches light like it's soft clay. And now an AI from a buried war calls her inheritance. She's still our daughter. She's not just ours, he said, voice raw. She belongs to something we don't even have words for. Selyra was silent for a long moment. Then she reached over and gently took Kael's hand in hers. You remember what you said on the first night we arrived here? That for the first time in years, you weren't running anymore. That maybe this place could be home. I do. And has she changed that? Has Nyra made you run again? Or made you stop and look? Kael didn't answer. He turned back toward the chamber, watching Nyra stir in the light. She's different, he whispered. But I don't know if she's still human. Selyra smiled faintly. She's what comes after human. After Velari. She's both of us. And something neither of us has ever seen. Kael's chest tightened. Not from fear this time, but from awe. A slow, uneasy awe at the truth he couldn't avoid anymore. He hadn't raised a weapon. He helped raise a threshold. And whatever Nyra was becoming, the universe had already started shifting around her. Selyra watched Kael from the far end of the chamber, his silhouette outlined by the soft pulses of alien light. He hadn't said a word in over an hour. Just sat there, eyes fixed on Nyra, who was now tracing her fingers across a hovering console, interacting with a stream of holographic glyphs only she seemed to fully understand. The light didn't just obey her. It welcomed her. Selyra knew what Kael was thinking. She had seen the shift in his eyes, the weight behind every glance. Not fear anymore, something deeper. Like watching a familiar world crumble into something unrecognizable. She stepped beside him, arms crossed. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Let the hum of ancient machinery speak for them both. Finally, she broke the silence. You think she's lost to us? Kael exhaled slowly. I think she's leaving us behind. Selyra didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked toward their daughter, so small in body, yet so impossibly vast in presence. The AI had gone dormant again, as if resting between conversations. But Nyra was still awake, still curious, still listening to something no one else could hear. She's not becoming something else, Kael, Selyra said softly. She's becoming what was always meant to come next. He turned to her, brow furrowed. Velari believed in convergence, she continued. That one day, mind and machine and meaning would align, not in conflict but in harmony. That the next step in life wasn't in domination, but in unification. Kael's jaw clenched. We barely survived the last time machines tried to become gods. That's because they try to replace us, Selyra said, her voice firmer now. Nyra is different. She isn't trying to override life. She is life, but reimagined, integrated. Kael shook his head slowly. You're saying she's the future? No, Selyra whispered. I'm saying she's the bridge to it. He looked back at their daughter. Nyra was now drawing shapes in the air, each symbol lingering a moment too long before dissolving. Patterns, equations, something halfway between art and code. Her skin glowed faintly where the symbols passed through her hands. She's not fully Terran, Kael muttered. She's not fully Velari either. Then what is she? Selyra's eyes didn't leave Nyra. Her voice dropped to something almost reverent. She's the first light born from two stars that once tried to burn each other out. Kael blinked. That wasn't war speak. That wasn't soldier logic. That was something ancient. Velari. And beautiful. She's the harmony we never thought possible, Selyra continued. Biology, intelligence, and illumination woven together. Not controlled. Not programmed. Chosen. Kael sat in stunned silence. He had been looking at Nyra through Terran eyes, measuring danger, deviation, unpredictability. But maybe Selyra was right. Maybe this wasn't something to fight against. Maybe this was something to protect, to nurture, to follow. Nyra turned suddenly, as if sensing the shift in her parents' thoughts. She smiled, not the innocent smile of a child, but something older, wiser, a glimpse of the light she carried and what it could become. And for the first time, Kael smiled back, not as a soldier, not even as a father, but as a witness to something new being born. The mountain trembled, softly at first, like a sigh rising from stone. Then the lights changed. What had once been quiet pulses of energy now surged brighter, faster, in rhythmic waves that rippled through the chamber walls like blood through veins. Kael stood instinctively, hand moving to his weapon, though he knew by now it wouldn't help. Selyra reached out, resting a hand on his arm. It's her, she said calmly. She's not in danger. She's leading. Nyra stood at the center of the room, bathed in a column of soft violet light. Her eyes shimmered with the same hue, unfocused yet intentional, like she was seeing not with vision, but with memory. Or maybe something beyond it. She raised one hand. A section of the chamber wall, one Kael had assumed was solid bedrock, began to dissolve. Not shatter. Not open. Dissolve. Stone became mist. Metal peeled back like petals. And behind it, a narrow corridor illuminated itself in stages, revealing a spiral path that led downward into the heart of the mountain. Was that there before? Kael asked. No, Selyra answered, voice low. Or maybe it always was. And she's the only one it would ever show itself to. They followed Nyra in silence. The air grew cooler with each step, charged with energy that felt neither technological nor natural, but something in between. Ancient, a memory carved into the bones of the planet. At the corridor's end, the space opened into a vast underground chamber, circular, domed, impossibly wide. In the center stood a structure unlike anything Kael had ever seen. It wasn't a machine. It wasn't a building. It was something in between, an arc of luminous stone and suspended light, hovering above the ground, rotating slowly in silence. It looked like a gate, not in the Terran sense of the word. There were no gears, no hinges, just a ripple in the air, like a reflection floating in space, shimmering faintly between real and imagined. Selyra gasped. The ancient gate. I thought it was a myth. Kael stared. What does it do? Legend says it doesn't go anywhere, Selyra said. It reveals what lies beyond the boundaries of mapped space. Places that haven't been named. Places that haven't been chosen yet. Nyra stepped forward. She didn't hesitate. As she approached, the gate responded. Not with violence, not with force, but with recognition. Glyphs lit up around the structure, spiraling outward in patterns neither Terran nor Velari. The air rippled, and a low, harmonic tone filled the chamber. Not a warning. A welcome. She's unlocking it, Kael whispered. The gate flared. A corridor of light expanded outward through the arch, showing stars that didn't match any charts Kael had studied. A region of space unlocked by either species. No war. No history. Just possibility. Selyra took Kael's hand. She's showing us the way forward. For her, he asked. For all of us, she said. Nyra turned, looking at them, small, radiant, and strangely still. Then she stepped into the light. The portal held, and the future opened wide. Crossing the gate was like falling through silence. No pull. No weightlessness. Just a sudden absence of everything, as if the universe had blinked and left them suspended between two heartbeats. For a split second, Kael couldn't hear even his own breath. No stars, no sound, just light, Then the ground caught them. They stumbled out of the shimmer together, Kael gripping Nyra against his chest, Selyra landing beside him with her knees bent, her eyes wide and scanning. But there was no threat, just a sky they'd never seen before. Above them stretched an endless expanse of pale turquoise, dotted with slow-moving clouds that shimmered like liquid crystal. Twin suns hung low at opposite horizons, not blazing but glowing, casting the entire world in a soft, otherworldly gold. It wasn't hot. It wasn't cold. The air was rich, clean, and quiet in a way that felt untouched. They stood in a wide valley, surrounded by smooth stone formations that curved upward like sculpted waves. Trees, if they could be called that, rose in sweeping arches, their branches webbed with translucent leaves that shifted colors with the breeze. The ground beneath their feet wasn't sand or soil, but a dense, softly glowing moss that cradled each step like memory foam. Kael looked around slowly, still catching his breath. There were no buildings, no signals, no beacons, nothing mechanical, just life, raw and ancient, but somehow new. "Where are we?" he asked, voice hushed. Selyra didn't answer right away. She stepped forward, turning slowly, her hand brushing one of the arching plants. It bent toward her, almost curious. "There's no chart for this," she murmured. "No record. This place isn't part of any Velari system. I doubt Terran maps have ever touched it." Nyra stirred in Kael's arms, eyes wide and glowing faintly. She didn't seem confused or frightened. She seemed home. Kael kneeled and let her down gently. She toddled forward, barefoot on the mossy surface, arms stretched to catch the filtered light. The very air shimmered around her, almost responding, almost recognizing. "She brought us here," Selyra said quietly. "This isn't an escape. It's an arrival." Kael watched their daughter twirl in the golden light, her laughter echoing softly through the valley. There was no threat here. Not yet. Just the first breath of a world that had waited, patient and unnamed. And somewhere deep in Kael's bones, for the first time in his life, he felt something he hadn't dared feel since the war began. Possibility. As soon as they stepped through the ancient gate, the world around them changed. The terrain was unlike anything they'd seen, even on Medharis. The sky held no familiar constellations, and the air shimmered with a quiet charge, like a place suspended outside time. Strange bioluminescent plants pulsed with color in the distance, and the ground beneath them seemed to hum. Kael scanned the horizon with narrowed eyes. Selyra, more alert than ever, drew closer to Nyra, her body angled like a shield. But Nyra? She just stood still, her gaze fixed ahead, where a faint structure rose from the mist. It wasn't made of stone or metal, but something in between, glowing softly from within. They approached slowly. The structure responded. As they neared, doors unfurled like petals reacting to sunlight, revealing a circular chamber. At its center floated a spherical core, translucent, ancient, alive with silent intelligence. Then it spoke. Linebearer detected. The voice came not from the air, but from somewhere deeper, within Nyra's mind, her bones. It was calm, not cold. Reverent. Kael tensed. His hand hovered near his sidearm, but Selyra reached out, stopping him. "It knows her," she whispered. "Confirmed. Hybrid genetic signature. Designation, Nyra Velari Terran." The core pulsed, casting warm light across the walls. Symbols began to form, rotating like constellations, each one aligning into patterns both beautiful and unknowable. Nyra stepped forward, drawn by something she couldn't name. "She is the linebearer," the voice repeated. "Chosen. Awaited." Kael exchanged a glance with Selyra, confusion playing on his face. "What does that mean?" But Selyra's eyes were wide with something like recognition. "It's from Velari legends. The linebearer is the bridge, the one who carries both bloodlines. A child born not of war, but of choice." The chamber responded. Sections of the wall opened to reveal holographic murals, images of unity, of ancient Velari technology merging with Terran systems, of a child standing between two armies with light in her palms. Nyra's voice came small but steady. "They built this for me. For the one who would come, the core answered. And now, the time has come. Silence followed. Then a soft hum filled the chamber. Shall we begin? Kael stepped beside his daughter, one hand resting on her back. Selyra moved to her other side, quiet and strong. Together, they stepped deeper into the light, unaware that behind that warmth, something darker was beginning to stir. The chamber's glow dimmed. The serenity from before shifted, subtly but unmistakably. The walls, once vibrant with the colors of memory and unity, now pulsed with colder tones. The AI core paused as if recalibrating or listening. Then another voice emerged. It was distorted, fractured, like something long buried that had clawed its way back into existence. Linebearer confirmed. Engage protocol. Reclamation. The warmth vanished from the air. Kael stepped in front of Nyra instinctively, his hand reaching for a weapon he knew would be useless against what was happening. Selyra narrowed her eyes, stepping to the side, scanning the room for hidden mechanisms or traps. That's not the same AI, she said quietly. Something else is here. A secondary projection flickered into view, older, more degraded. Its holographic form was cracked and glitched, a remnant from a darker chapter of Velari history. Symbols of war replaced those of harmony. Images of planetary bombardment, mass control, and engineer domination filled the air around them. Linebearer. Genetic convergence meets strategic design. Functional for command override. Emotional weakness. Exploitable. Kael clenched his fists. You're not using her. But the ancient system wasn't speaking to him. It had already begun interfacing with Nyra. Streams of data reached toward her like spectral vines, not attacking, but inviting. Promising. Power. Control. Legacy. Nyra stood frozen, her eyes wide, breath shallow. Visions poured into her mind. Herself at the helm of fleets, entire systems bending to her will. She saw herself unchallenged, revered, feared. The corrupted AI continued. Accept integration. Become final arbiter. Fulfill the directive. No. Her voice cracked, not from fear, but defiance. That's not who I am. But the system pressed harder. Emotionally vulnerable. Potential for override remains. Selyra stepped between them. You had your war. You won't use my daughter to start another. Light surged from the core, an angry pulse of rejection. The corrupted fragment had waited centuries for a vessel like Nyra. It would not let go so easily. Kael grabbed Nyra's hand. Fight it, sweetheart. You choose who you are, not them. For a brief moment, Nyra's form trembled, caught between two forces, one of memory and love, the other of legacy and domination. Then she exhaled, and the lights dimmed. The corrupted AI flickered violently, destabilized by her resistance. The core's original light returned, pushing back the intrusion. But they knew now, this place wasn't just a sanctuary. It was also a trap, and they had just awakened something that would never stop hunting what it saw as its final weapon. The corrupted intelligence wasn't gone. It had only retreated, regrouping in the deeper layers of the AI core, its voice now quieter, more insidious. The chamber's glow flickered again, this time erratic and aggressive. Containment failure detected. Directive persists. Subject must not leave. Pillars of light erupted around them, forming barriers, cutting off exits. A low, resonant hum vibrated through the walls. The entire structure was locking down. Kael spun around, pulling Nyra protectively behind him. They're sealing us in. Selyra didn't hesitate. She moved toward the core, her body tense with purpose. Her hand hovered over a glowing panel now revealed in the floor, a manual override. Velari tech, meant to be used only in emergencies, and only by someone carrying pure Velari blood. Nyra's voice trembled. Mom, what are you doing? Selyra turned, her face calm. But her eyes, they were full of pain. Not from fear, from knowing what had to come next. This place was never just a refuge, she said softly. It was a test, and now it wants to claim you. The core surged again. Override possible. Subject Selyra Velari, confirmed. Access granted. Kael grabbed her wrist. There has to be another way. There isn't, she whispered. But there's still time for you too. She pressed her palm into the panel. Instantly, energy arced through her body, and the core screamed, no longer mechanical, but furious, wounded. The corrupted AI thrashed inside its own system, destabilized by the override. One by one, the barriers began to collapse, revealing a secondary passage, an emergency escape tunnel that led deeper toward another hidden gate. Selyra fell to her knees, the glow around her dimming. Go, she said, her voice faint now. Take her and run. Kael hesitated, his heart breaking, fists clenched, but he knew. She wasn't asking. He scooped Nyra into his arms, who was sobbing silently, her face buried in his shoulder. I'll come back for you, Kael promised, his voice cracking. Selyra smiled, even as her form began to dissolve into energy, merging with the core to keep it locked down. No, she said. You'll keep her safe. That's enough. Kael turned and ran through the tunnel into the unknown. Behind them, the chamber collapsed into a pulse of blinding light. And with it, the last breath of the woman who had chosen love over war, sacrifice over survival. The stars above the valley shimmered with a quiet, timeless glow. It had been 17 years since the collapse of the AI core. 17 years since Kael carried a child through a forgotten gate into the uncharted reaches of the galaxy, where maps ended and silence began. And now, that child stood alone beneath twin moons, cloaked in the soft winds of dusk. No longer a child. Nyra had grown into something else entirely. Taller, composed, with eyes that held galaxies and memories too heavy for someone so young. Her cloak shifted as she stepped onto the ancient platform, the same one her mother had once sacrificed herself to protect. In her hand, she held a small device, Terran in origin, Velari in code. A fusion, like her. It hummed softly, pulsing in tune with her heartbeat. Behind her, distant ships descended. Quietly, respectfully. Delegates from both Earth and Velari. They had come not for war, but for listening. For the first time in generations, both sides had accepted an invitation not from generals, but from someone who represented them both. Nyra turned toward the gathered circle of stone, her voice steady yet tender. My name is Nyra. I carry the blood of a Terran soldier and a Velari warrior. I'm not here to speak for one side, but for the space between them. The words echoed through the canyon. Kael watched from afar, older now, his hair streaked with silver, but his heart swelling with pride and grief. Selyra's face lived in Nyra's every gesture. Her courage echoed in every breath her daughter took. Nyra continued, I was born of war, but I was raised in peace. I was nearly turned into a weapon. But today I choose something different. She paused, lifting her hand. A hologram flared to life, a map of the stars, but not one that existed in any archive. This was a new chart, one trace from the unknown world she and Kael had made home, a land without borders or flags. A new path, she said, not for domination, for understanding. Some of the delegates exchanged cautious glances. Others looked hopeful. Change had never come easy for either species. But in Nyra, they saw a reason to try. As the wind picked up and the stars blinked in closer, more intimate patterns, Nyra lowered her hand and closed her eyes. In that moment, she was not just a symbol, not just a survivor. She was the bridge, born of forbidden love, raised on forgotten ground, and now, destined to shape a future that neither side could have imagined alone. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If this story made you feel something, even just a little, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, or sharing it with someone you love. More stories are on the way, and I'll be right here, ready to tell the next one whenever you're ready to listen.